Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell. Brought to you by...
When Signs and Displays Direct was launched 15 years ago, it featured a complete line of banners and stands, product displays, and more. Today, the company is known as SDD and is the industry leader in turnkey, no-inventory POP programs. SDD has expanded into branding programs for both corporate and private label, as well as consulting services for retail showroom design and more. Visit sdd-us.com. That's sdd-us.com. All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and joining me tonight, Marshall Crenshaw. Marshall, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, tell you, we've actually been kind of playing 6 Degrees of Marshall Crenshaw because we, not too long ago had an episode which Glenn Burtnick was on, and then we've got an upcoming episode that Bill Lloyd is our guest.
Well, how about that? Wow.
So and now we've got you.
2 longtime pals of mine. Good people, both of them. Really good.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Well, tell you what, why don't we, start out our conversation here talking about the track Something's Gonna Happen.
Oh, all right.
And tell us about that song and how that, what role that played in your career.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was the A-side of the first record I ever made. And it was for a record label called Shake Records, New York City record label. And Shake Records was essentially one person, although he had a partner in the beginning. But anyway, a guy named Alan Bedrock. It was his label. And, I was just, kind of in an ambitious mode then, and I was trying to get something going in the world, and start having some kind of a life. So I went up to the office of Shake Records one day, and I left a cassette tape with this woman who was sitting at a desk, and she was just sitting there by herself in this room with cardboard boxes piled up everywhere. And it was really kind of like this is a record company, right? And anyway, I gave her the tape, and Alan, he did this funny thing because he flipped the tape over to the other side, the cassette. Like the thing that I put on the A side was just this one track called Jungle Rock. I covered this old rockabilly song called Jungle Rock, and I recorded it on my home 4-track. I thought that might impress him. I don't know why, or it might impress somebody. But he listened to Jungle Rock. Apparently, it didn't do much of anything for him. But he flipped the tape over and listened to the other side. And I never would do that myself. I would just listen a little bit to the beginning of the first side, and if I didn't like it right away, I would just
it's gone,
throw it across the room or whatever. But anyway, he flipped it over, and there were like a bunch of my original songs on that side of the tape, and he liked that stuff a lot. In fact, he just reached out to me and immediately said he wanted to make a record with me, and that was amazing. Right around that same time, I connected with Robert Gordon and Richard Goddard, so it was almost simultaneous. They weren't very far apart, the 2 contacts I made, and those are just really crucial. Those 2 things together really changed my whole life in a good way.
Because you and Richard end up doing the first album for Warner Brothers.
True. I did. And I heard Richard Goddard on a podcast the other week. He was interviewed by a guy named Bob Lefsetz on the Lefsetz podcast, and they talked about me. Richard said nice things. I was happy. But the funny thing was he didn't say anything at all about the prehistory of us doing my first album together, which was that about a year before we did that record.
Okay.
I was in the studio. I was in the studio with him to work on a Robert Gordon record, and Richard didn't say anything at all about that. And maybe he doesn't even remember that, but like he kind of discovered me, you might say. Richard did. Richard Goddard. But anyway, when he was talking on the Left It's podcast, he just went straight to the part where he and I did my first album together. But what happened with that was I went into the studio by myself without a producer. I was, the producer. I'd kind of lied my way into the job, I guess. But I got in a little bit of a jam with that, and then a distress call went out to Richard to come in and save the day. I reached out to him because I knew him already, and I'd had a history with him, and I liked him. He's a fun person to be around, and so that was it. But I like, from the sessions I did myself before he came along, the only thing that made it onto my first album was a tune called "Cynical Girl." I did that one by myself, played everything on it and sang everything on it. And then Richard came in and listened to it, and he said, well, the only thing I would suggest is just replace the bass part, because I had a keyboard bass on it doing this kind of, anyway, it was a cheesy sound. And Richard said, well, put an electric Fender bass on it and it'll be good to go. So anyway, he was great to work with, really nice. We had a good time.
He had such great things that he had done with Strange Loves and everything else. So
yeah, I mean, he and his two partners, Bob Feldman, Jerry Goldstein, and Richard Goddard, they were a really good songwriting and record producing team. Like I always loved "My Boyfriend's Back" by the Angels. Still think that's a pretty good record. They wrote this tune that I wound up doing on my second album. They wrote a tune called "What Time Is It?" recorded by a group called the Jive Five.
Yep.
And that was a record that was in my house when I was growing up. The Jive Five version of "What Time Is It?" I always liked it. I think maybe that was the first time I ever saw Richard's name on a record. But the crazy thing about him is he's still at it. And he's had maybe like the longest career of any record producer. And the last thing I know of that he did with this really good group from Sweden called the Raveonettes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were like really cutting edge and interesting, so he just like, and I could tell from listening to him on the interview that he just loves it still. And anyway, he's a cool guy.
Yeah, well,
there's one funny thing that happened that day.
What's that?
I said there's one funny thing that happened. Well, during the Robert Gordon recording sessions, he pulled me into a room at one point and he says, well, do you have a publisher? I said, no. And he said, well, how about if we publish the songs? And I didn't know what that meant. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. Somebody should publish the songs. So, I agreed to let him do that. And to this day, I've never gotten a royalty statement from him or a nickel, except some money that I got from him then. So he's very old school, that Richard.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it was only 4 songs. So anyway, he's great. Last time I saw him, I was really happy to see him, and I didn't even mention that to him.
Getting back to Something's Gonna Happen, you later did an EP with Ronnie Spector, with that as the title track. How did that come about?
Well, that was Alan Bedrock again. You remember I mentioned him before. He was Shake Records, the guy that put out my first record. And, a dear person in my life who's been off the planet for a while. But anyway, at one point he got a chance to produce some stuff with Ronnie Spector. And I know that was a big deal to him because he was a big Phil Spector devotee, as I was too. I still love those records. Anyway, he just had a chance to work with Ronnie, and he told me he played about a dozen tunes for her, 20 tunes for her. He said she didn't like any of them except for your songs. And so I'm
That's
like,
quite a compliment.
it was, and so we went in the studio with Alan, and he wanted to use my trio that I had then, which was my brother on drums and Graham Maybe, that was the bass player at that time. So we went into the New York record plant, and we rehearsed for a day, and then we went into the New York record plant where I had done my first album, cut these tracks for Ronnie. At the time I wasn't really sure how, if it was coming off well or not, but it took forever and ever for that stuff to see the light of day and get released. And then when it did come out, I heard it again, and I thought, oh, this is so nice. It really is great. It just sounds so nice on these tunes, and the playing was good too. That's the thing I wasn't sure about, whether we played well or not, but we did. And so I guess those are my favorite cover versions of that anybody has done of my songs, or versions of those tunes. And she really did. You had a good feel for them, and you could tell she was enthusiastic about the songs.
Well, the first time I heard it, my thought was, this almost sounds like the songs were written for her.
One of them was, there's a song that she did called Communication. And I wrote it for her because she did another record with somebody else, before I ever met Alan or anything. And I got asked to try and write a tune for that record. She was working with a producer then named Genya Raven. And I wrote the song for Ronnie, but I don't think Ronnie ever even heard it back then. Funny, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you never know, how something's going to go or where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you, you mentioned covers. We did a show that aired a week or so ago with the Midnight Callers. Which
don't know who that is.
It's a new act on Gem Records, and
okay.
we were talking about as we were in the show talking about things we listened to. ABBA came up, and so we were talking about ABBA covers, and Chris from the band and I both immediately referenced your cover of Knowing Me, Knowing You. And because we were saying ABBA songs are very hard to cover, yet you pulled it off, and I think part of it is one of the things that I always loved about the original record was I love the tone of the guitar on that track.
Sure.
And I think that is kind of what segued to your version and why your version works. Now, how did you come to cover that one?
Well, I love that song, and I have to say, I dislike a lot of ABBA's stuff. Most of it I don't like, but the stuff I do like, I love, and there's maybe a half dozen or 10 of their other songs that I could listen to right now. And but some of them are just really, really hokey and saccharine to me, but anyway, they could be great when they were great, and I love the players on the records. But they eventually they switched to using drum machines and MIDI and all that stuff like that. But at the beginning they had a really great crew of players on the records, I thought. And anyhow, I don't know why. I just thought we would play it. It's a great song, great lyrics. A favorite of mine. There was no reason not to do it. The other thing is it's kind of a curveball, because you go see your rock band and you're not really expecting them to play an ABBA song necessarily, or
right?
I don't know if it's ABBA or ABBA. In Australia they pronounce it ABBA. So anyhow, we just did it, and people were like, "Oh wow, ha ha!" Listen, they're playing an ABBA song, but we really played it for real.
Right.
Wanted to, celebrated it, right? And the version on the record, it's supposed to be a live album, and mostly it is, but that track was one of two that we did sort of like fake live in the studio. But we cut the track live. We didn't do overdubs. We just played it live with myself and Steve Holley on drums. Richard Kennedy was the other guitar player. Graham maybe again. It was all Britannic people except for me.
Yeah.
I was the token American in that group. But anyway, we just played it, live, and then we put the vocals on. And that's it. And then we added fake applause and called it a live recording.
That was the track on my truck is my home.
That was the name of the album. Yeah, live
Yeah.
album. From all different points in my timeline. And that's it, that's a good recording. I like that one.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, earlier you mentioned What Time Is It from Field Day.
All right.
And now tell us about that album, because that was a much bigger sound, obviously, than the debut.
Right. The debut album, it wasn't, the approach that was taken with it was kind of different from what I would have done myself. But that was the point of Richard Goddard being there, is that I didn't really know what I was doing. I learned my recording skills, such as they were. I learned on 4-track equipment. Back in the 70s, I was part owner of a recording studio in the Detroit area, and we bought all this equipment from a record label that had shut down like about 1969, and the gear was like 7-8 years out of date when we bought it, but it all worked, and it was 4-track, a 4-track Scully, and just really some great tube sounding stuff that we wound up with. So I learned how to record on that stuff, and then I got a 4-track myself later, made all my original demos on a 4-track. And on a 4-track, you have to do a lot of overdubbing, fill the 3 tracks, and then bounce to the 4th, and just layer stuff like that. And then later on with when I tried to produce my first album, of course, it was all multi-track, and it was all solid state equipment, and I just couldn't get the grease into the sound that I wanted. I didn't know how to do it. And that just wasn't the ethos at the time, with the other people I was working with. So where was I? Oh yeah, so we did my first album, and it was too soon after when I did my second album, but I didn't want to repeat the exact same process. It wasn't because I was bitter about it, but I just, why do the same exact thing twice, right?
You're looking for growth.
Right. So the only producer I reached out to was Steve Lillywhite, because I loved the records of his that I heard. And I wasn't so much hearing them on the radio then as I was hearing them in the clubs where we played, because the club DJs really loved those records, right? And
right.
In the New York clubs, the DJs had really eclectic taste, and I loved that. And anyway, I just thought, well, with the sound of those records, it was sort of like otherworldly almost. The sounds that Steve was getting on his records, they were like larger than life, but just like really interesting and down to earth in their own way. So I brought him in. He was great, and we hit it off really nicely. Did the record. We both loved it. I loved it. And we did What Time Is It? I thought it would just be kind of a nice friendly gesture to Richard Goddard if I did one of his songs on the record. It was just a kind of a way of saying, hey, it's all good. That really was my thought at the time. Plus, like I said before, I always knew that record and loved it. So we just took a crack at it. But Steve was the one who kind of directed the arrangement that we came up with just this weird sonic landscape to it, rather than just try to play it like a rock band would play it. He was like, well, let's put like backwards bass drums on it and do this and that. And I was completely on board with all that, all the stuff you wanted to do on that track. I thought, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I remember the first time hearing Whenever You're on My Mind.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I thought, A, what a great sound. Yeah. And you could really hear, for the lack of a better description, a maturation in the process,
Yeah.
for
Oh,
you.
absolutely.
So, and
Yeah,
I'll tell
yeah.
you what,
That was the kind of rock and roll record I wanted to make back then, which was like a big, like almost takes you into an imaginative realm with the sound. Like I was thinking of records like "Baby I Love You" by the Ronettes, or "Just Once in My Life" by the Righteous Brothers. Records where it almost crosses over into noise. You know, I wanted to go down that road
yeah.
with Field Day. But at the same time, I wanted to not use a bunch of instruments. I didn't want to get into big layering with the guitars. I just wanted it to be like one or two at the most. So
Hmm.
that's the cool thing about that record, is it only has one electric guitar, bass, drums, percussion, and then I overdub the solo. It sounds massive, but it's just very spare instrumentation.
Yeah. Well, to tell you what, you mentioned that little 4 track. Was that what you recorded Favorite Waste of Time on?
Yeah, that was a machine you could buy back then, a TIAC 3340S, which was the first kind of consumer multi-track machine, you know.
Yeah. Well,
And
that was on that. You played everything, right?
I did, yeah. When I
Yeah.
had my 4-track and made my first demos. I did have my brother playing drums on a lot of that stuff, but to record him, I'd have to drag my machine into New York City to the rehearsal studio where he worked. And so on days when I didn't feel like doing that, I would just do it all by myself
Yeah.
at
But I
home.
remember because that track was the flip side of the 45 of Someday Some Way, and it was attributed to you and was it the Handsome, Ruthless, and Stupid Band, if I
That's
remember
a
right.
quote. That's a quote from Dorothy Parker, the writer. She said, what I require in a man is that he be handsome, ruthless, and stupid. And so there we were, the handsome, ruthless, but it's just me by myself.
So you're all of that and more.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, tell you what, moving on, with Downtown, you got to work with T-Bone Burnett and Mitch Easter, and
Oh yeah.
now that album was yet another departure in sound for you. You went from that big full sound to a very stripped down approach. Tell us about making that record.
I don't know if it was stripped down. Okay, well, after Field Day, I had a meeting at Warner Brothers, and I begged the two boss guys at the label to let me off the label and let me out of my contract, because it just didn't go very well for anybody. And I wasn't, I asked them very nicely. I didn't go crazy and let any anger out. I just said, I mean, you got to admit this has really gone badly, right? But they wouldn't do it. And so they said, just let's make some more records. So it was really hard for me to swallow that. And it took me a good long while to get my mind around it, and go forward. But Downtown, what we tried to do then was, like, I kept my same manager. I did. I stayed with him. So we were just going to try to figure out how we could all understand each other and get along, because Warner Brothers didn't like Field Day. They hated it, and I loved it. So what are you going to do? But anyhow, so Downtown was just, trying to create a friendly scenario. And T-Bone, I was really glad to hook up with him. I'd been a fan of his because I really liked his solo records. I didn't even know he was a record producer when I got to be a fan of his as a recording artist himself. But anyway, Yeah, well, I just sort of went along with a lot of stuff, and that was cool because I knew that I just sort of like was having to start from a different place, but I couldn't do my little self-contained group anymore. It's probably time to move on from that anyway. But and it's a lot of session musicians,
Hmm.
and I don't use that term in any kind of disparaging way. I think a lot of people talk smack about studio musicians and wrongly, but like I had Jerry Murata on drums, really great guy and great artiste. Tony Levin on bass. Tony Gagne came in and played on a tune. I forget. Oh, one of T-Bone's guys, David Miner, played bass on a lot of stuff. Mickey Curry on drums, and then my brother was on one tune, but Chris Donato, my bass player from the first two albums, he never saw the inside of a studio for that. For Downtown, I just did the best I could with the circumstances I was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
One one thing I remember, I'll say this about Downtown is I did a Gene Vincent song on the album. I covered a tune called Right Now.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, these lyrics aren't really as slick as they ought to be. So I did like a song doctoring thing on the lyrics, made these little changes, and somebody said, well, and since you changed the song, maybe you should see if you can get a piece of the songwriting. And I said, no, I don't want to be greedy. I'm not going to do that. And then about a year later, Mary Chapin Carpenter comes along and covered my version of Right Now, used all my lyric changes. And, I don't know if she ever heard the Gene Vincent version. Maybe she did. But anyhow, I missed out on that little opportunity there. But anyway,
Yeah, well,
other
tell you what, that album had a couple of tracks I really like. Little Wild One and Yvonne.
Yvonne, I like. Little Wild One, I'm not so crazy about, but that's for personal reasons.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, well, sure. Like I said, I did the best I could. It had some good times. Another thing that was cool about that album is when we were out in Los Angeles, which was for most of the time on that record, we were at a studio called Sunset Sound, and uh, Prince was in one of the other studios working on, I don't know what, maybe Purple Rain. I'm not so sure. But my wife was out there with me for a while, and she would sit out in the courtyard at the studio at the picnic table reading a book and wait for him to come out, because he would come out every now and then, take a break, and he would shoot hoops with his bodyguard. And this bodyguard is like a giant sized guy, and Prince is not giant sized, but he was like all over this guy. It's that's one of the things people know about Prince now, is that he was a crazy good basketball player. But anyway, that was my wife. Has fond memories of just sitting there and like having Prince come out and play shoot hoops, and
Yeah, that's cool.
it was great. Yeah, yeah. With a lot, we did. I did have some fun making that record.
Yeah, well, good. Well, tell me this: how did you wind up working with Don Dixon on the next one, Mary Jean and Nine Others?
Oh, I'd worked with him on a Marty Jones album, and we had mutual friends, so I'd gotten to know him a little bit, and I liked him. I was on that album. I was trying to get back to like a self-contained band kind of thing, and it was my brother again on drums, Graham maybe on bass. So that was it. Dixon came in,
Yeah.
did the record, did a great job. Some nice stuff on that record.
You know what? There's a lot of tracks on there that I really like. So
Hmm.
yeah.
But again, my third, fourth, and fifth album at Warner's, there was like they were like done under duress to me. It was just in a funny place trying to
Yeah.
make
Well,
trying to make those records. It wasn't anything like, when I did Field Day, it was just like this really joyful time, and this kind of buoyant, joyful atmosphere in my life, and sense of possibility and stuff, and just running around New York City late at night after the sessions, and it's just a whole different thing from
yeah.
the third, fourth, and fifth album. It's like not the same mood at all.
Well, I had read that about Good Evening, and
No, that was the worst one of all.
yeah. Now on that one, you had more covers than what you normally do,
Yeah.
and but I thought they were really interesting choices. You know,
Well,
uh, you know, your cover of Richard Thompson's Valerie.
oh yeah,
That I think that's a killer track.
that is pretty good. And the John Hyatt song is pretty good too.
Yep, and then you also covered the Isley Brothers.
Yeah,
Yeah. Now,
always
how did you choose
always
that
loved
song?
them. I just always loved them and loved their stuff. And that's all. I just was trying to
Yeah.
fill up the album, is what I was doing.
And
No, it
then,
was
I mean,
it was rough.
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like I got. Anyway, yeah, it was that I never should have made that album, but I
Yeah.
did.
Well, you had a contract to fulfill.
That's right, and there was money to be collected too, so that was why I got talked into making that album.
Yeah.
All that stuff. I really love my first two albums. There's the third, fourth, and fifth. Mixed feelings about it, just on a personal level. But I will say, like somebody out there somewhere loves each one of those albums. So I don't want to knock those things. There's somebody's favorite record out there in the world, which is nice.
Well,
Um,
the nice thing for you has got to be the fact that even though because of what you were going through,
yeah,
with the label, the work didn't suffer. Like I say,
thank
you
you,
you
thank you.
you could go through it, and like I say, the cover of Bobby Fuller's "Let Her Dance." I mean, that
Yeah.
track just rocks.
It's not as good as Bobby's though.
Well, you know what? Nobody could touch that. It's kind of like anybody trying to cover Del Shannon's "Runaway." You're not going to be able to top it. So just
That's right. Yeah.
So,
But again, like I said, I was just trying to fill up the album.
yeah. Now,
Yeah.
Life's Too Short was kind of like a creative rebirth for you, correct?
It was almost, like the ones that I consider to be a creative rebirth, quote unquote, were the first two Razor and Tie albums. Because on the first one, Miracle of Science, I got back to my like home studio thing, my solitary genius thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that I started out that way. I started out just kind of making the recordings myself, and then with Miracle of Science, I was left alone again and just sort of like took that hands-on approach. So that's an album of mine that I love, Miracle of Science, and then the one after that, number 447.
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
think those are really good records that I made.
I'll tell you more than once in talking music, whether with fellow radio people or just friends who are music fanatics like myself. In discussing you, one of the common thoughts was you're one of those guys that needs to produce himself. Other people may bring something to the table, but you know what works for you, and your songwriting and sound and stuff. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, that's nice. I mean, I get that, but I do have to say that when I worked with Richard Goddard, it was because I couldn't navigate the process myself, and I learned a lot from him, and I wouldn't have been able to make a record without him. And then when I worked with Steve, that was a great collaboration, and we all dug it. And then T-Bone, I even I learned a lot from him too. He was really a piece of work, that T-Bone Burnett. But anyway, like I said, I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from everybody that I worked with. But once I got to Miracle of Science and could just do it myself, it was like I had to unlearn some things that I'd learned and forget some things that I'd learned about how to make records in the 80s. I do the best I
There's a
can
lot of
every
stuff about
time.
80s. Yeah, I was gonna say there's a lot of stuff about 80s record production that needs to be forgotten.
By me, for sure. But Not that I don't like. I mean, I like a lot of records from the '80s. You know, like. But anyhow, I always do the best I can. But I think that situation I was in for my first two Razor and Tie albums was like a really nice, friendly situation for me.
Yeah, I'll tell
I,
you.
I, I mean, I liked working with Ed Stasium too. He's a great guy, still a good friend. So you know, I'm not complaining.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you from Miracle of Science. Starless Summer Sky. I
Yeah.
think is a standout. So is What Do You Dream Of? As far as
Uh,
songs of yours,
uh,
theme from Flare Gun. What's the story behind that one?
let me see. I wrote that when I was trying to write stuff for Downtown, and I wrote it first as an instrumental, which is what it now is and permanently is. But you know, at first I thought I should have words and just be a song with lyrics, but I was having a nearly impossible time writing any lyrics that I was happy with. My mind was all clouded up with anger and a lot of other things then. So it was difficult for me to get words on a page when I was writing Downtown. So I turned to a good friend of mine and somebody who I'm a fan of as a songwriter, and that's a guy named Jules Shear.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote some lyrics for Theme from Flare Gun, and they were good, but something just made me decide to do it as an instrumental after that. It had like this big long storyline and everything like that. It just didn't feel right to me. But he's a really good writer, all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Just a matter
Yeah.
of taste and feel on my part. So that's all. That's all. And so I did it as an instrumental. I just think it's great. I grew
Yeah.
up with rock instrumentals on the radio. It's not a strange thing to me. I heard all those Duane Eddy records on the radio when they were hits, and I love those records and all the rest. Hank Marvin and the Shadows I liked, and et cetera, et cetera. Rock instrumentals used to be just as common as anything else, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
I'll tell you when I mentioned before, how you had had guested on my old country flashback show, and that was about the time that the Bear family had released the Duane Eddy box set.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and we spent you and I spent quite a bit of time talking about that box set and Lee Hazelwood's production and Dwayne's playing, and yeah, that was a really nicely done set.
I loved it. I got really deeply into that. And
Yeah,
but that's again, those records, they have this quality of like otherworldliness. They're not going for realism. They're just,
right.
creating like a soundscape to prod your imagination. And but I mean, the environment those guys were in when they made those records, they're out in the desert, in Arizona, and the wide open spaces. So that's where they got the sound from, I guess, just by looking out the window and seeing the mountains and the sky. And so the sound, it has that kind of big,
Right.
expansive sound, really beautiful to me.
No,
Uh,
I agree with you. I'll tell you what you mentioned like songs that you listened to, growing up. What was the first album that you bought with your own money?
well, I bought singles first. Uh, so what was the first album I bought? That I don't actually remember
Okay, how about
what
singles?
the
What was the
first
first
album was.
singles?
First singles I bought with my own money. I went to the dime store one day with some paper route money, and I bought good the Great Airplane Strike by Paul Revere and the Raiders, and I bought the Blues Magoos, We Ain't Got Nothing Yet, and Good Vibrations. I bought those 345s with my own money. That was first that I remember.
Yeah.
I wonder what the first album was that I ever bought with my own money. There had to be a first. I just don't know what it was
Yeah.
anymore. I might still have it.
Yeah. Do you still have any of the 45s?
Not those that I just named, but I mean, I do still have records that I've been carting around since the '70s, since I lived in Michigan. Some of them I haven't even played since I lived in Michigan, and
Yeah.
that's 40
What
plus years ago, but I have them still.
what would you consider the crown jewel of your collection?
I don't know. Uh, I can't think of one. I have a lot of nice records,
Yeah,
but
it's hard to choose just one. I know I couldn't do it.
yeah, I
So
can't either.
yeah. Well, tell you one thing that you've done that I think is really neat is your collection of EPs.
Oh, right. That was kind of the most recent recording
Yeah,
project that I did. That
yeah.
stuff is really good. I like that stuff too.
Well, you know what I like is you've got new material. You get a couple of your older songs that you did, and you got some unique covers all mixed in with it, and
Right.
which I find very interesting. So I really like those.
Good. Yeah, that was the idea, is to have it be interesting and fun. Uh, yeah, you know what? That's pretty good. If if somebody next time somebody asks me to name my own favorite records of mine, I'll remember those because I do like those. Like Driving and Dreaming. That's one of the best tracks I ever did. And what else is on there? Uh, oh, one called Move Now is a
Yeah,
really good one. That's one of my favorite things I ever did. And I
yeah,
did that one by myself. Played the drums, not that great, but I did it. And and I did one of the B-sides. I did the Carpenters, Close to You.
right.
I did a version of that where I played the bass and drums, and then this guy Rob Morseberger did most of everything else. He brought in the string players and stuff. But I told him I want to do like a note for note duplication knockoff of "Close to You" by the Carpenters. And I couldn't have done it without him. Rob is passed away, not from COVID, but he died a couple of years ago. He was a
Yeah.
brilliant guy.
Well, tell you what, we mentioned Miracle of Science. You did a reissue on that not too long ago, correct?
Yes, 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 yes.
So
Um,
is that part of a bigger project of reissuing your existing albums?
that was the idea, yeah. But I should check in with the lady at the record label and ask her when she wants to put out the second one.
Yeah,
I'm about to do a licensing deal for my Warner Brothers albums because I got the U.S. rights back. Well, I shouldn't say back because I never had them before, but now I own the U.S. copyrights of the recordings, and
excellent.
yeah, and I have the publishing too. So that's pretty great. I got the recordings back just in time for Someday, Someway to be licensed for usage on this TV show called The Goldbergs a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
yeah, so I wanted to renovate this barn that I'm in, and lo and behold, there was a check in my mailbox the other day. Bang, one fell swoop. And
Mailbox money is a beautiful thing.
it's my life. Yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah. I forgot what your question was. Someday,
You
some
don't.
way.
Yeah, we were just talking about the reissues and
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was about to tell you that I made a licensing deal for the first two albums, and we're gonna remaster the first one and do all this other stuff. That's gonna be with a label called Yep Rock, which is a really good record label.
yeah. To tell me this, with the Field Day reissue, are you going to be able to include the tracks that were on the 12-inch US remix where you had the cover of the live version of Little Sister?
Well, that's the only one of those tracks that I like. See, I don't like their US remixes
Yeah,
at
well,
all.
that's why I mentioned Little Sister because that was again, a killer track.
Maybe we'll keep that one, but I mean, with Yep Rock is going to reissue Field Day, and there will be some bonus tracks, but it won't be those. With the label that just did the Field Day reissue a couple of years ago, Intervention, I love the job that they did on it, and the mastering job that the guy did is great. And but they were kind of far along with that whole thing before I even heard about it. And if they had talked to me in the beginning, I would have said, "Well, how about not using those US remixes? I got these other things that maybe you might like better." But,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the answer to that.
Yeah. So, besides the reissues, what do you have planned coming up music wise?
Well, I've been working on a documentary film since about 2016, and that's actually in a good place. Looks like uh, we're about to enter the end game phase with that whole thing. At the beginning of this year, I was really confident that it would be done by the end of this year, but then of course things got very, very sideways. So we lost about 5 months. I don't know how we're going to go forward, but I mean, I know we will somehow or another. But anyway, we're back at it, and we're in a good place. And I have an amazing team of people that are helping me. So that's really mostly what I've been working on since 2016. It's a really, you know, it's really a good project. Great
Yeah.
learning process and learning experience, and all that good food for my soul to be doing this. And it's a documentary about a record producer who should be famous and will be after we get finished. And his name was Tom Wilson. A documentary about history owes Tom Wilson a documentary, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm working on that.
Yeah, well, good deal. I'll tell you, we've got a little with the album on our wall here with Ray Price. We got a little nod to your "Thank God for Hillbilly Music" project.
Oh yeah.
How did you come to do that?
Well, some guys that I worked with for a bunch of years, the Burgoyne brothers, their company was called Bug Music, and it was a really cool business model they had. They represented songwriters and set up publishing companies for songwriters, and they would administer the publishing, and go scratch around in the world, around the world, and find all your nickels and dimes and mail them to you. But anyway, at one point they got a label deal with Capitol Records, Bug Capital. That was their imprint, and I was having lunch with those guys one day at the Hollywood Roosevelt, and Dan said, "Well, we're going to be able to go in the Capitol vaults and do reissue stuff." And I just immediately started talking his ear off about, the Louvin brothers and the Milo twins and all this great West Coast hillbilly music on Capitol Records that I was aware of. And he goes, "Well, you got to do this for us. Put the thing together." So I did. I put hillbilly music, thank God, together. Uh, a lot of people like that package, like a lot of them. Seems like whenever I talk to any Americana artists,
Mm-hmm.
they always tell me, like that whole thing really just spun my head around.
Yeah. Well, tell you, there's so much great material from West Coast country
Right.
that when people aren't familiar with, but once they hear it, they say, "Wow, this stuff is really good," and the production is so much better than a lot of the other stuff from that era.
Well, yeah, you don't have to sell me on it. But yeah, it was really, really fun doing that collection, doing the research for it. I'm mostly a music creator, guitar player. That's the thing that's kept the food on the table. But I love doing occasional like side trips,
Yeah.
like that hillbilly music thing was a big research thing, and a book project I did about rock and roll movies. That was like a year's worth of research. It was a lot of fun. And then the Tom Wilson thing I'm doing now, these are, like I said, they're side trips, but they're very gratifying. I learned a lot while I was doing the movie book, just about, there's like the sociological context of rock and roll and all that business.
Yeah.
So anyhow, the hillbilly music thing was fun, and I took the $25 producer fee that they gave me and went down to San Diego, and I bought a guitar that I don't have anymore, but it was like one of those Mosrite double necks,
Mm-hmm.
like Joe Maphis plays in the old film clips.
Yep.
I had that for a little while.
Oh, wow.
That's what I did with the money.
Well, that's cool. Well, tell you what, Marshall, we are actually past our standard run time here. So I do appreciate you taking the time to join us. There's a whole lot of stuff we didn't even get a chance to talk about. So hopefully in the future, you'll have some time and willing to come back.
We're past our sell-by date. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for reaching out, Michael.
Hey, no problem. No problem at all. All right, everybody. We'll tell you what. We've had MarshallCrenshaw.com across the bottom of the screen here during the show. So make sure you go visit that. Marshall's got an incredible catalog of work, albums that everybody needs to take a look at. So please do that. As a reminder, the show will be on the Facebook page, the YouTube channel, and every other social media platform you can think of, as well as musicnight.net. Until then, everybody, have a good night. Marshall, thank you. Have a good night.
All right. Bye now.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.